All right. Good evening. Good evening. All right, so just wanted to touch base as far as where we are in the course. I did make some small changes, so I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page as far as some of those changes go. Um, So I've logged into Brightspace. I've gone to content and week 2. So this is where we are currently. And so we have a couple quizzes this week. We did the personal mission statement practice. We also did that extra credit classmate introduction. So just a reminder, submit your documentation to that. Save your documentation for your speech portfolio, but upload it to those places to get those points. I did move to module 2, which is what we'll start next week. I did move the civic engagement news practice speech because we'll start working on it today, but we won't actually deliver it till Monday. So since you won't be delivering it till Monday, I moved that. It's a little bit different deadline, but the deadline is the 9th. So we'll meet on the 8th. And then, it gives you a day or so to just whatever you speak from, upload into Brightspace. So not a hard deadline. So if you need an extension to get that submitted, that's fine. But I didn't want to make it, didn't want to make you submit anything until you've actually, stood up and spoken. So you'll now see that moved from module 1 to the first part of module 2. You'll also see that, and this is somewhat of what we're working towards, you'll see the Chicago Places practice. And so I wanted to preview this so that you can go ahead and start thinking about a place in Chicago that you would like to share with this class. This could be a place that is special to you, or just Google a place and find some information about it. The goal is to get some information in order to practice the delivery techniques that we're going to be learning about. So that's the primary purpose of this practice speech. And that's kind of the last of our practice speeches, because at that point, once we get through delivery techniques, we've kind of completed, at least when it comes to informative speaking, we've completed all of the elements. And so this really gives us an opportunity not just to practice delivering our speech, but practice using a visual aid, practice using everything that we've learned up to this point. So that is not a long practice speech, but it is a little bit longer because it will involve you all getting up here to the lectern and practice speaking from the lectern. So I just wanted to kind of preview that. We will be doing that next week. So that's kind of our culminating activity that we'll be doing. So we'll do civic engagement news practice speeches on Monday, and then we'll do the Chicago Places on Wednesday. The other thing that we'll be learning about, like I said, is visual aids. So we'll talk through how to create a PowerPoint, so you can toss a couple photos onto PowerPoint or Google Slides, but I'll share with you kind of the specifics for how I'll want you to send that my way, because I'll actually have you submit your PowerPoint visual aid prior to class so that I can pull it up all on the computer. So between delivery, it'll all be up there. You don't have to come up and necessarily find your PowerPoint. I'll have everything queued up on the computer ready for you. So anyway, so that's usually a pretty fun practice speech. I have in Brightspace, I've posted, I believe it should be under here. If it's not, I'll post it in the announcement. I have a practice speech example where I share about the Shed Aquarium. And so it's a good formal delivery. It's an online speech, the one that I have video recorded. So it's not live in front of people. But that, as well as the instructor example, will give you kind of good guidance for what I'll be looking for the rest of the class for your for your outlines. So, because that's where we're going to go today, is we're going to finish talking about commemorative speaking, and then we'll start diving into the outline template and kind of each of those elements. I know I've kind of teased a little bit about each of those parts, or kind of previewed each of those parts, but we're going to kind of make sure we dive into it and that you understand some of those key elements of the outline. Any questions about where we are in this course and upcoming assignments, upcoming activities we'll be doing? All right. All right, so that is so that's where we're at. So if you have a way to take notes, now we'll pick back up with note-taking time. Talking about commemorative speeches. Get out paper or whatever you use to take notes. So a couple key things about commemorative speeches. They are typically intended to pay tribute. So this could pay tribute to a person. This could pay tribute to a group of people. This could pay tribute to an institution or an idea. But usually it's some kind of ceremonial speech. And so usually the goal is to inspire the audience or heighten admiration for the person that you might be commemorating. Sometimes you might be commemorating a particular phase in life, like a commencement or a graduation. So those tend to be when we see these. The commemorative speeches, these tend to be some of the most memorable speeches throughout history. And so when we think about, again, we think about our political speeches, we think about, like I said, ceremonial speeches like graduations, commencement ceremonies. We could also think about any kind of formal setting where someone may be getting up and giving some kind of formal remarks. Those tend to be the commemorative speeches. And so, like I said, they tend to be inspirational. And so we hear through commemorative speeches, I would say more so than the others, we hear some unique language that is language we can adopt and incorporate into our speeches. And so so some of the speeches that I had quoted before, right? So Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address speech, John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. These are all commemorative speeches. And so we can look to these speeches as great examples for how to motivate, how to encourage, how to inspire our audiences. And so I want us to look at an example of a specific type of commemorative speech, what we would call the keynote speech. And this video is more than just the speech. This video actually is an analysis of the speech and provides, I would say, what I feel to be useful insights into some of the strategies that the speaker uses in this speech. So it's more than the speech itself. So as we watch this, make note, take notes as to some of the key concepts or strategies that these people mention, because once the video is done, I'll ask for you all to share what are some of those strategies that you saw that they mentioned, that they identified, because we want to mirror, we want to do our best to duplicate and replicate these types of effective delivery techniques. So and effective phrasing and effective wording. So so that's why I want us to watch this and participate in that analysis. So this speech you may have seen before or heard about. This is the title of this video is The Speech That Made Obama President. When Barack Obama gave this speech, he was relatively unknown. At the time he gave the speech, I was living in Alabama. I had no idea who this guy was. I keep up with politics, but he was maybe known in the state of Illinois, but wasn't really known nationally. And it really was this speech that they talk about at the Democratic National Convention that really put him on the map, that really made him more well-known. And I think it's a great example of how one powerful speech at a powerful event that captured the world's attention really did elevate him to a position that a lot of people felt like was a position that allowed him to then transition to effectively winning a run for the presidency. And so it's hard to think back to a time, right, when he was unknown, right? When he was not known as a former president. So, but there was a time. And so I think, again, this is a great example of how he utilizes some of these strategies skillfully to grab our attention and to help us feel certain feelings. And so see if, as we're watching this and you hear some of the words that he uses, some of the emotions that he evokes, jot down what kind of emotions or feelings do you feel when he's sharing some of these stories, when he shares some of his examples. I'd be interested to know kind of what pathos, what emotion arises for you. So let's watch this example, take some notes about what stand out to you, and then afterwards we'll kind of dissect and talk through some of those.
Barack Obama in 2004 was totally unknown. People were saying, I don't know who this guy is. Wonder why they picked him.
He had his reputation as a bit of an upstart, as sort of a young, rising figure in the party, but no one knew who this guy was. This was his chance to introduce himself to people.
Tonight is a particular honor for me because, let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely. My father was a foreign student, born and raised in a small village in Kenya.
What makes it great political is if you can somehow fold your story into this larger American story.
The next thing he says is about his mother's family. His grandfather fought in World War II. He used the GI Bill at Southern Kansas, so white people could say, oh, he's just like us.
My parents shared not only an improbable love, they shared an abiding faith in the possibilities of this nation. I stand here knowing that my story is part of the larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that in no other country on earth is my story even possible.
Going into this speech, we've had 4 years of George Bush, and we felt as a country like we've grown further apart.
2004 was very much a divisive partisan race. Obama's speech is in some ways an antidote to that.
Alongside our famous individualism, there's another ingredient in the American side, a belief that we're all connected as one people. If there's a child on the south side of Chicago who can't read, that matters to me even if it's not my child. If there's a senior citizen somewhere who can't pay for their prescription drugs and have to choose between medicine and the rent, that makes my life poor even if it's not my grandparent. It is that fundamental belief, I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, that makes this country work. E pluribus unum, out of many, one.
He gives a speech that presages his entire political message of 2008, which is this sort of post-partisan argument.
Now, even as we speak, there are those who are preparing to divide us. The spin masters, the negative ad peddlers, who embrace the politics of anything goes. Well, I say to them tonight, there is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Obama was born with two great gifts. One is his mind, and the other is his ability to speak to large groups of people.
There are 3 things that Obama does that really makes that speech effective. He wants concrete detail. He likes story, and he loves antithesis, the use of repetition and structure to show contrast. There is not a liberal America or a conservative America. There is one America.
Black America, and a white America, and Latino America, and Asian America. There's the United States of America. But pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. But I've got news for them too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around in our libraries in the red states. We coach Little League in the blue states, and yes, we got some gay friends in the red states. We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
The way he uses his hands. He actually points a lot, does a lot of this, a lot of this, a lot of that.
In doing so, he gives off this sense of energy. I am new. I'm someone who is dynamic.
And he doesn't do that so much anymore. He's a little more solemn and reserved when he gives speeches today, but I think it's more reflective of his office.
In the end, that's what this election is about. Do we participate in a politics of cynicism, or do we participate in a politics of hope? It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs. The hope of immigrants setting out for distant shores. The hope of a young naval lieutenant bravely patrolling the Mekong Delta. The hope of a mill worker's son who dares to defy the odds. The hope of a skinny kid with a funny name who believes that America has a place for him too. Hope in the face of difficulty. Hope in the face of uncertainty. The audacity of hope.
His appearance at that convention, which was the best speech of the convention, better than John Kerry's, was electrifying. And without it, he wouldn't be president.
I think sincerity means a lot. There are people who, when they speak the truth as they see it, and they're very effective at doing that.
I believe this country will reclaim its promise, and out of this long political darkness, a brighter day will come. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you.
Right. So what stood out to you? What stood out to you? Yeah.
I noticed that, like, right off the bat, he talked about his family, which is like something that I think politicians do a lot because everybody has a family, so it like immediately, like even last night, like in the vice presidential debate, I noticed like they both spoke on like their children, their families, their parents, their backgrounds, and I think that is like really relatable to everybody because like, you know, we all have, you know, parents and stuff.
Sure. Yes, definitely. So, in speaking about family, that is something like you said, we all have that in common. Another word, and they mentioned that finding common ground. Another word for that finding common ground is rapport. And that's R-A-P-P-O-R-T. Looks like report. But talking about family, like Finn is saying, talking about family is a way to build rapport. As a matter of fact, identifying what your audience maybe has in common with you and working that into your speech is going to build rapport. So we can see that through family. Are there other ways you heard him build rapport in this speech? Yeah.
He pointed out the different parties, what they believe in, what the Democratic Party like believed in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So he identified the values, but not just of his party, but also he referenced values of the other party. So that's both of values both personal, and we can say and of others. Right. So, and specifically that's effective in political speeches where you're trying to maybe juxtapose yourself against the others. But yes, great. So yeah, talking about those values. Yeah.
His body language.
His body language. Yes. What about his body language?
Kind of hard to explain, but he was trying to. His body language was like confident, like he was like a figure, like a. I don't know if anybody watch My Hero Academia, like y'all know All Might, like he was like kind of trying to be like the symbol of hope.
Mm-hmm. He was. Yeah. So that poise, that confidence that comes through not just vocally, but through his position, how he stands. And we're going to talk more about that when we talk about delivery techniques and using our body effectively during our speech. But yes, that's a great example. What else stood out to you in this speech? Yes.
I feel like, well, I'm a fan, always, him and Michelle, forever. But I feel like anytime that he does speak,
he always speaks with like kindness in his tone of voice.
Yes, so a kind tone. And tonal quality is one that we'll talk about as well when we talk about delivery techniques. Yeah.
He was empathetic.
Empathy also is a great way to build rapport. What else? Yes.
He was also addressing like the working class as well.
Yes.
And also addressing as well like people of color as well.
Exactly. He was making his message applicable to all people. Yes. Yes.
Going off of that, you seem more like we're all in this together, not just one-sided.
Exactly. So there's, I'm gonna write this really big. We. When we use the word we are all in this together. That is an excellent way to build rapport. In fact, when you're doing the rapport step of your speeches, I'll be listening for that, right? I'll be listening for that key word. We or all of us, something along those lines are key words to use to build that rapport. So we'll dive deeper into that as well. Thank you for identifying that. Awesome. Who else? In the back, yeah.
I mentioned this, but he sounded like he was speaking from the heart.
He was, right? He really, I'll put that from the heart.
I was gonna say sincere, so.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Heart, sincere. Yes. So, and that, some people are good at doing that, are good actors, right? Other people, they actually mean it, right? And that's for us to determine, that's for us to evaluate, right? When people are speaking, are they doing it sincerely? And sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Or are they doing it because they're putting on a show or they're just really good actors? What else stood out? Yes.
I noticed that he placed a lot of emphasis on hope, and it makes, like, he repeated the word a lot,
Mhm.
and that ended up being like his whole, like, campaign slogan, so I almost wonder if he already knew that he was planning on running for president then, and was like pre-campaigning in a way, like associating it with himself, and also just like the repetition in general as like a speech tool.
Yes. So, and he wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope, and he uses that phrase in this speech. And so, so I think you bring up a good point, like to what degree was he kind of already maybe making those plans? But this repetitive phrasing is one that we definitely want to incorporate into our speeches in this class. So that repetitive phrasing, parallel structure. One of the speakers mentioned antithesis, right? So this comparing and contrasting different things in our speech. Those are very effective strategies, very, very effective techniques. We could also call that, parallelism, repetitive phrasing. He uses lists, right? So lists, bullet points, if you put bullet points on your outline, that's great. And so that's why I say in this class, we don't write essays necessarily. We don't write papers, we write outlines. Because with outlines, you can use bullet points, right? And you can use numbers and letters, and you should use that. And so we'll learn about the importance of structure to our outlines and that visual structure and how that helps us. But bullet points, numbers, letters in order to organize things. But here you can kind of hear some of those lists where maybe on his notes, he may have them in bullet points. Any other things stand out to you? Yeah.
I think what probably stand out more was like nobody knew of him. He was like a clean slate for for a lot of Americans. So
Yes.
they left. So it was allowed for him to like kind of experiment with what he wanted to say in his speech.
Exactly. He was new, right? New to a lot of people, and this was where we learned about him. Because those of us, and I remember watching this speech live, I remember saying, all right, I need to figure out who this guy is. And like they said in the video, that speech was better than John Kerry's speech. There was a reason why the guy didn't win an election, right? He's not the most motivational person, right? Or inspirational person, especially compared to Obama at that convention. And so as you saw in the video, there are people who had already made signs with Obama's name on it. Again, he wasn't running for president. They were still a few years out from that. but they had already kind of identified him, I think, as someone who could be a leader in the party. Who else? Saw another hand, yeah.
I think he also, I don't know if he just carries himself or he knows how to also have like a lot of integrity, like, you know, when he walks up and like when he speaks, that it makes you like proud to like be an American, like the American dream instead of feeling shame, I guess. In a sense.
Exactly. So, and they start kind of talking about this, right? So the American story, finding a way to connect your story to the American story and kind of referencing the American dream, American values, particularly for politicians is effective. And so you're going to hear that as a kind of a recurring theme. But what you mentioned, I think is relevant, right? That, and it's been mentioned several times, right? That how he comes across is very sincere and like he means what he says and he carries himself with confidence and comes across with solid integrity. And that goes back to what we learned from some of the Greek rhetoricians, right? That to be a speaker, you must have moral goodness. That was not Aristotle, right? That was the later rhetoricians like Quintilian and, well, Isocrates and Quintilian and Cicero. And so you see that speakers, even to this day, they have that moral goodness that really needs to come through, specifically if they're a politician. That goodwill for their audience really helps convey that integrity. So great job. Any other insights or anything else stand out to you? Yeah.
I like this way how he, at the same time, he united everyone, saying like we are people, but at the same time, he stated that everyone has their own struggle, their own story. Everyone is different, unique in some way, but at the same time, we all kind of pursuing the American story.
Exactly. Yeah. We have that unity, but we're all individuals. Yeah. And those are key themes. Again, particularly for political speeches, but I think especially when we get to persuasive speaking later on, keep these things in mind. Keep those themes in mind because incorporating that into your speech is going to add to the pathos, right? If you are identifying it as something that stands out to you now, that is going to resonate with audience members if you incorporate it into your speech. So that's why I really love this kind of analysis because it really is giving us some things that we could apply right now in some of our speeches. And you have all referenced everything that I wrote down. So just a few things, tone, you mentioned kind tone, but he also has a powerful and commanding tone, which again, helps him connect with his audience and helps his audience see him as more in a position of authority, which became true when he became president and he was in a position of authority, but that commanding presence is particularly powerful in persuasive speaking. And just to kind of wrap up, the three things that the people one of the people that they interviewed mentioned: concrete detail, right? So he's getting very specific. He's mentioning specific examples, right? And so when we're going out and collecting information for our speeches or collecting data for our speeches, we want to find those specific examples. We can do generalities all day long, but it's going to be specific examples and specific stories that you incorporate into your speech that are going to help your speech be very powerful. And then they mentioned story. Right? We would also call that narrative. Right. So what is the narrative? What narrative do you incorporate? Whose stories are you sharing or telling in your speech to provide support for your points? And then the last one was antithesis. Antithesis. So that comparing, contrasting, not a liberal America, not a conservative America, United States of America, which is also parallel phrasing. So awesome. Great example. Regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, I think everyone across the board really does hold specifically Barack Obama in high esteem when it comes to his speaking. So a great example. If you want to go watch more videos of him, particularly I would say prior to him becoming president, so when he was campaigning. Yeah, I would say those probably are where he's most emphatic, when he's most expressive. And they do kind of reference how when he became president, he kind of toned down a little bit. I think I heard he started getting gray hair, and I think someone was like, in stress, right? Like, yes, like when you transition into those roles, you then there is a little bit of a shift, a little bit of a change. So awesome. So that is kind of our last little bit regarding speaking, and it gives us something that we can use as we take a look at our speech outline templates. So sorry, I just skipped. Slides are a little out of order there. There we go. So let's talk about that speech outline template. So starting really with the civic engagement news speech, you can really start to use the outline template. I don't require it until the informative speech, but the more you can download that Word document from course resources and get in there and fill in those blanks, that's really what we are wanting to get practice doing. And so I wanted to talk about, this is in reference to special occasion speaking, makes it, there's a few things that are different when it comes to special occasion, informative and persuasive. But there are going to be a lot of things, and we'll dive deeper into like word patterns when we get to informative speaking, but there's going to be some things that are the same. And the outline you'll see between the three outline templates that I've put on Brightspace, you're going to see they pretty much look the same, except with just some minor changes. So let me kind of talk through the preparation stage, because that's going to be where we start. Regardless of what speech you are working on, the preparation stage is where we begin. And that is going to be where we generate the ideas, where we generate what is it we want to share with our audience. Now, remember, for our special occasion speech, it's a little bit different. So informative speeches we inform, persuasive speeches we persuade, but special occasion speeches we fulfill the need of the occasion. And so we have to identify what is the need of the occasion. We need to identify that purpose. So you'll see in some of the outline templates, you'll see I have subject. Subject is something that can just be general, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be specified at that time. It could be, so if we're talking about informative speaking, it could be Muhammad Ali, it could be cars, it could, so it can be kind of that general subject. The goal of preparation is to narrow your focus. And so we start with the subject. Our general purpose for a special occasion speech would be to fulfill the needs of the occasion. Our specific purpose is to what? So if we were going to be introducing someone, then our specific purpose is to introduce. If we are presenting an award, our specific purpose is to award or to recognize someone for their accomplishments. So if you're using the outline template for a special occasion speech, then you would just identify that type and then remove what you don't use and just select that type and then move on. So these were the kind of four main types that we've talked about regarding special occasion speeches. And then organizational patterns. So when we talk about organizational patterns, this is the order in which you present your main points. And I have a lecture where I dive into several of these, multiple organizational patterns. But just to give you a place to start, as we're thinking about the civic engagement news practice speech, I want you to see if you can identify an organizational pattern that works. So let's talk about the first one, topical. Topical. So topical is going to be and this is where I probably need to change some of my phrasing. So topical is going to be, if you think about subject, and so I'm going to kind of cross the divide between special occasion speaking and informative speaking as I talk through this, because again, this is applicable to both. So if we're thinking topical. So topical. So if our subject is cars, right? That's going to be our cars. If we do it topically, right, then it's going to be any three topics underneath this umbrella of cars. What are three things related to cars? Just shout them out. Engine. Steering wheel.
Gas price.
Gas. So there you go. There's three topics about cars. So if we wanted to do this, and so again, it's really any. So that's the most freeing. A lot of people, if they can't figure out an organizational pattern, it's usually topic, right? Any 3 topics related to your subject. The other organizational pattern I kind of want to introduce you to as we get started is going to be chronological. So that's going to be in order of time. So I'll just abbreviate it to chronological. So in order of time. So what I mean by that is that could be by date, that could be by season, that could be by year, that could be in order of like time of day, depending on what your topic is. So it's going to be in order of time. So again, this is how you're presenting your main points. So once you identify your subject and you're working on gathering information, you'll want to know in what order am I going to share that information. And sometimes, depending on the information, chronological makes sense. And then the other I want to kind of introduce you to is going to be comparative. So this is going to be if you're comparing one or more things, this versus that. So that's going to be our comparative. And again, I have a lecture where I'll dive deeper into all of these, and I'll share a few others that you'll probably probably maybe a little better than these. But it's this or that, one or more things that you're comparing. So those are our organizational patterns. So next we have the introduction of our outline. So this is where I'll actually kind of transition now pretty much away from special occasion speeches because I don't want us to get confused. We just gave speeches of introduction, but what I'm referring to here is the introduction stage, or you may hear me refer to as the introduction phase of our outlines. All of our speeches should have an introduction. So remember, Corax of Syracuse told us that speeches should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And so that's what we are referring to now, is that introduction stage, that introduction phase. So when I'm talking about the introduction, the first part of the introduction is that attention step. You may also hear me refer to it as the attention getting step, or I may just call it an attention getting device. Device meaning these are items, these are things or strategies we use to get our audience's attention. So thus far, we've used quotes. Quotes to me are the simplest, sometimes the easiest attention step. When we start our speeches, it's important to know that that preparation stage where we're identifying our organizational pattern, when we're identifying our purpose, when we write out our subject, that's just to help us go out and get the information. That's actually not where we start our speech. Where we verbally start our speech is going to be the attention step. So when you get up and stand up at the lectern, have I explained why this is called a lectern? Does anyone know? Exactly. So a lot of people may call this a podium, which is actually an error. Podiums you stand on. Think about if any of you were in like a high school that had a band, right? A marching band, and the conductor would be up, or maybe an orchestra. The conductor stands up on a podium, right? So that they can be more visible. But it is a lectern because that is where scholars lecture. And so anyway, you stand behind a lectern and you stand on a podium. There you go. A neat little fact there. So when you come up and stand at the lectern, maybe on a podium, then the first thing that comes out of your mouth is going to be whatever your attention step is. Your quote, your joke, your statistic, something to get the audience's attention. I had my speech instructor would always say, we want to start with wow. A lot of exclamation points. Start with wow and end with wow. So that would be what he would tell us. So we start our speech strong with our attention step. Then the next thing we say, after we say whatever our attention step is, the next thing we say is our rapport phrase, our rapport sentence, right? So we reference some kind of common experience that most likely everybody has in common. which we've done thus far. We've practiced that in our introduction speeches by saying something to the effect of, I'm sure we've all had to introduce ourselves, or we've all been new to a class and had to introduce ourselves. What you're trying to get the audience to do, and there's a psychological reason for this, what you're trying to get the audience to do is say, yes, I agree with that. Yes, I have experienced that. And psychologically, by them agreeing with you, you've got them on board at the start. And that helps you as a speaker. Because what you're trying to do is get your audience's attention and keep their attention throughout the speech. And if they feel like there is some kind of common ground between you and them, they are more likely to attune and pay attention to what you are saying. So reference that common experience. And that's going to be related to your subject, right? I'm sure we've all seen cars, right? I'm sure we've all ridden in a car, right? That's very simplistic, but you get the point, right? That you are referencing something that most likely everybody has had an experience with. So then after you build that rapport, you need to establish your credibility as the speaker. And what you are answering is this question the audience is constantly asking, which is why should I listen to you? Why are you standing up here and speaking to me? The audience is also asking, what's in it for me? But we'll get to that in a moment. But their first question here is, why are you talking to me? Why should I listen to you? And so you as the speaker need to address that in your introduction. So why is the speaker credible? Why should they listen to you? What are your credentials? And by credentials, I mean your experience, your expertise, your degrees, whatever that might be, your training, you have training. So why should the audience listen to you? So we have in the previous practice speech we did, you said, I've interviewed this person. That's credibility. That's ethos. That's credibility because you're saying, I've done some research, right? I have looked into this. I have collected this information and I'm sharing it with you. So sometimes it's as simple as just saying, I've researched this topic and I want to share it with you. Or I have experience with this topic and I'm going to share with you some of my experiences. So it can be as simple as that, but you have to address why should the audience be listening to you? And then after you've gotten their attention, you've built rapport and you establish your credibility as the speaker, you're going to preview your main points. And this is why it's important to already know in what order you're going to share those main points. Because when you get to your preview step, you're just going to list. So that preview step is what we call, and I probably already used this word, redundant touchstone. So this is the first of our formal redundant touchstones. So this is where, remember, for a redundant touchstone, we repeat the same thing multiple times. And in our speeches in this class, I am listening for you to repeat your main points at least 3 times. The first time you're going to do it is your preview step. So most commonly, and what you'll see in a lot of my examples are, today I will share with you, or tonight I will share with you, main point 1, main point 2, main point 3. You're literally just listing those main points. This serves a couple purposes. Well, I would say this serves one purpose, and this is called the primacy effect. So the primacy effect is a psychological concept that says some people are going to remember what they hear first. The first things out of your mouth, some people, that's what's going to stick with them, regardless of whatever else you say. So for some people, just by listing your main points here towards the start of your speech, you have gotten your message across to them, right? Because again, your main points are your key message, are what you want your audience to remember when they walk out the door. So the first time you're sharing it is in your preview step. That's your first redundant touchstone. So that is your introduction. That completes your introduction. So pretty simple, but it's a very important place to start so that we get our audience's attention, build rapport, establish our credibility, and introduce them to what we are about to go into more depth on. All right, it is 6:20. Let's take about a 5-minute break and we'll pick back up with the body of the speech. 5 minutes. So that is the main points. Once you share your main point, then you go into your subpoints or your supporting points. And that is where you are pulling in that information that you are going out and collecting, the data that you are researching. For the civic engagement news speech, you just have one main point, and that's going to be whatever the key point is of the article that you find and share with us. So that is going to be where you're going out and doing research. And so there'll be a lecture next week where I dive deeper into how to do research. I'll share a little bit in preparation for the civic engagement news speech, but when we get ready to do our informative speeches, we want to make sure we're going out and collecting data from credible sources. So we'll talk through what that looks like. Once you share that information, which for a persuasive speech is going to be logical reasoning, it's going to be factual information. So it's whatever data you have gone out and collected. Then you have a transition statement, and the transition statement, and again, the book sometimes uses different words for this, but this is kind of my approach with the outline templates. The transition connects your first main point to your next main point, or it really connects main points. The transition statement, the easiest way to phrase a transition statement is, now that I've shared with you my first main point, next, let me share with you this main point, right? So you are literally just using these words to bridge your main points. Now, your transition statement, it also helps your speech flow. So when we get to the point of delivery and I'm listening for speeches to flow, sometimes if you don't have a clearly written out transition statement, it can feel choppy. And so these transition statements really help us keep the flow of our speech going. So once you say that transition statement, now that I've shared with you about the engine of a car, next let me share with you about the gas needed for the car. Whatever that is, whatever you're connecting, make sure that you phrase it there in that transition. And then you do the same thing. You have your main point, you go into your subpoints or your supporting points, and then you have another transition statement, which could be similar. Could be something to the effect of, now that I've shared with you about gas, let me next share with you about steering wheel. Right? So you go through, and that is the formula. That is the formula for the main points and for the body of your speech. When you get to kind of your last subpoint and supporting point, in the outline, you might see a spot for a transition statement. That's just if you're going to continue with another main point. Once you're done with your last, the last supporting point or subpoint, once you share that data, that information, for your final point, you go right into the conclusion. So the conclusion has some important steps. So for this class, I am listening for a cue. A cue that I'm looking for could be in conclusion, or it could be to conclude. But I am listening for the word conclusion or conclude in some way. That cue is what we call a signpost that helps your audience know that you are getting to the end. So if they were not awake for what you just shared in the body of your speech, they're going to wake up now because, oh my goodness, they're getting to the end of their speech. After you use your cue to cue your audience that you are getting to the end of your speech, you're going to review your main points. The review step is going to be your final redundant touchstone. So remember, the first redundant touchstone is in the preview step, where we just list those main points. The second redundant touchstone is actually just you going through each of those main points, right? Because you are then repeating that for a second time. So that is the kind of the second redundant touchstone, is going through the body of your speech. And then the third redundant touchstone is going to be your review step. Now, the review step, similar to the preview step, serves a psychological purpose, and that is what we call the recency effect. So the recency effect, similar to the primacy effect, just opposite. So the recency effect basically says that some people are going to remember or retain the last thing that you say, whatever is most recent, right? And so for our review step, we want to review those main points. If they hadn't been paying attention, if they hadn't been listening, again, our main points are the key message that we want to get across to our audience. So we're going to list those main points, something to the effect of, in conclusion, today I shared with you main point 1, main point 2, main point 3. So you're putting it into past tense, and that is your review step. And then we go into our memorable closing. So we've reviewed our main points. Our memorable closing, remember how my instructor says to start with wow and end with wow? This is where we end with wow. So the memorable closing is very similar to the attention step. It can be a quote, it can be a story, it could be a statistic, right? It could be something that leaves your audience with wow. And so a few things that we'll learn and we'll kind of practice with as we go throughout the course is sometimes people start with a story in their introduction as part of their attention step. Sometimes they weave that story throughout their speech, and then they'll conclude that story as part of their memorable closing. An example of that is when we watched the self-introduction example where the speaker talked about the courtyard. She started off talking about the courtyard and family values and her family history related to this courtyard. She kind of incorporated the courtyard, mentioned it throughout the speech, but she came back and then kind of concluded referencing that courtyard. So you can use a story, you can use a narrative, you can use an example and incorporate it throughout. In this class, I think we were just practicing using quotes, right? So we use a quote for the attention step. We use that quote again, part of our memorable closing. So that's acceptable as well. But it's leaving your audience with wow in relation to your subject, in relation to your key message. If this was a special occasion speech, we would end with some kind of polite ending. For an informative speech or a persuasive speech, what I'll be listening for is for you just to say thank you. So thank you is just a key word, a cue that tells your audience, that signals your audience to clap. So that's how we know that you're actually done talking, is when you say at the very end, thank you. So, but again, if it was a speech of introduction, which we didn't practice doing this, but speech of introduction, a good polite ending would be, please give a warm welcome to, whoever you are introducing. Or if you're giving an award or a presentation, please join me in congratulating this winner. If it's a commemorative speech, you usually end with some kind of powerful, memorable closing, a quote or a story. If it's a speech of acceptance, you're accepting an award or a gift, you usually just end with thank you. But for our informative speech and our persuasive speech, we want to make sure that the last thing we say is thank you. So that cues our audience to clap. You'll also see in the outline template a place to put references. So I will be looking for, I can't remember, I think it's maybe 3 references for the informative speech. But we'll dive more into that. So as you're going out and getting research, we'll talk through how to provide those references. So this is the kind of a general outline template for all of our speeches in this class. All of our speeches will have all of these parts, except I accidentally duplicated memorable closing twice. So, so cue, review, memorable closing, and then thank you. So this is the kind of core of the outline templates that I've provided. Any questions about this? Yes.
Do you recommend to have 3 main points for the body, or it doesn't matter?
For this class, I recommend 3 to 4. It depends on what your speech is, right? So if you are designing this speech for a different class, right? So you're taking maybe a biology class or some kind of science class where you have to do a presentation and you use this outline, you might have 5, 6, 7, 8 main points. Perfectly fine. But for this class, because of time, I would say 3, no more than 4. That also helps you kind of narrow your focus as well as you're going out and doing research. So it's very easy to want to include everything, but making those intentional choices to narrow it down will help. So, yes. Other questions about speech outline template? All right, let's talk for a minute about ethics. Ethics. Has anyone ever taken an ethics class? Yes, 1, 2. I took my first ethics class as a doctoral student, and it it was one of the toughest classes I've ever had. So, with a couple, there were a couple of philosophy professors at Gonzaga. But when I talk about ethics in this class, I'm not talking about anything particularly challenging or anything necessarily, I would say hard. But I do want to just talk through what is ethical public speaking and what are some of the ethical lapses, because this is going to be important as we transition to preparing for our civic engagement news practice speech. So ethics, just to get started, and I did have my notes up here, but I've been using my iPad too much today, so I'm kind of winging it here. So ethics in this class, when I refer to ethics, I'm referring to essentially what we do as speakers to ensure that our message, that our information, that our data is accurate, that it is not false, that it is not misleading. No, I'm good, thank you. I'll just go with it. And so we have to give that some thought. We have to give some thought to ensure that what we are sharing is accurate. One of the key words when we, or one of the, I would say, ethical lapses, let me go transition here. One of the ethical lapses that we face and that we're challenged with is what we call plagiarism. Now, it's interesting how oratory and rhetoric throughout history, the idea of plagiarism has changed. So when I was studying Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and some of his writings, he borrowed some phrases from other people that if Dr. King was before us today and we were to analyze that particular writing or that particular speech, we would call it plagiarism. Because at that point in time, it was acceptable to, especially in the circles where Dr. King worked, especially in the world of being a minister and a pastor in the Baptist church where he was. It was okay. Like you heard a sermon by another preacher, you could incorporate that into your sermon, and that was perfectly okay. It was considered an honor. But nowadays, especially in academia, we would consider that to be plagiarism. And so how do we avoid plagiarism? Well, first we need to know the different types of plagiarism. And so I'm going to share with you 3 types of plagiarism, because if we can recognize it, we are more likely to avoid it. So the first type, first the definition of plagiarism is presenting language or ideas from another person or someone else as our own. So that is what we are trying to avoid. Global plagiarism is the first type of plagiarism we need to be mindful of. So if you're taking notes, make a note of this. So global plagiarism is stealing from a single source and passing it off as our own. So you copied the entire thing and you said, this is all my words. That's very easy to do in a speech, right? If you're going out and collecting information, if you do not share with us the source, you are committing global plagiarism. So we do this unintentionally, right? That's why it's important for us to work to recognize it, because we really do it without knowing it. The second type is what we call patchwork plagiarism. So that's going to be when stealing ideas or language from 2 or 3 sources and passing it off as our own. But again, we could just be referencing sources and not citing them. So that is then considered patchwork plagiarism. So ideas from multiple sources, compiling it, putting it together as our own. And then the third, global is the whole thing. Patchwork literally is like the patchwork quilt here. It's pieces pulled together. And then the last is going to be incremental. So this is where we just fail to give credit for parts that are borrowed from other sources. So we may not be piecing together things, but we may have just failed to give credit or failed to give acknowledgement. And that's why it's just incremental plagiarism. So how do we avoid all of this? Well, we avoid all of this by citing our sources. And so in our speeches in this course, anytime we are sharing information that we have pulled from somewhere else that is not our own, we must cite it. And we can cite it directly according to, and then cite that source, or we can paraphrase. Even when we paraphrase and we're putting things into our own words, if that is still information or data that we have pulled from a source, we still need to give that source credit. So we might be rewording it for our speech, but if we don't give credit, it is considered plagiarism. let's just watch a short video where they talk about citing sources.
So you've been asked to include verbal citations in your research speech, and you're wondering, how do I do that?
Well, we're students too, and we're here to help you do great verbal citing.
What is a verbal citation? Verbal citations are when the speaker tells the audience where he or she learned the supporting materials that is included in the speech. These citations are used for both paraphrased information and direct quotes.
Verbal citations communicate the speaker's source, the expertise of that source, enhance the speaker's credibility, and allow the listener to judge how much he or she trusts the source used by the speaker.
What should go in your verbal citation?
You need to make it clear what source you used to obtain your supporting material, that is, what you read or viewed. So you might include title of the article or video, title of the publication, the author or presenter, appropriate dates, and a qualifying statement that conveys the expertise of that source. For this, you might state the professional or scholarly connection to the topic, the standards related to the topic, experience related to the topic, and timeliness.
Why should those things be included in your verbal citation? Well, your audience has questions. They want to know why you think your sources are credible. And audience members are also wondering about the expertise and perspective of your sources. So let them know.
So what makes a source credible? The answer to that starts with your topic. As relates to that topic, what is the authority or experience of the writer or speaker? Or maybe a source is credible because of the professional or scholarly standards. For example, a political scientist writing about a political campaign, or a news reporter objectively describing what happened at a political rally.
So our source is credible if there's a professional, scholarly, or authoritative connection to the subject. Maybe that connection comes from the medium used, such as a news site having objective fact-gathering standards, or a website that focuses on medical research features a piece written by one of the researchers, or the organization in charge of an event puts information about the event on their website.
Let's look at some examples. Pretend you're doing an informative speech about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. Take a look at this excerpt from the outline. There it is. Notice the in-text citation, parade history. That's where you need a verbal citation. After all, the audience won't see your in-text citation because they won't see your outline. So verbally cite.
So what should we tell the audience? Start with your works cited entry. What does it tell you? Look at your notes. Did you learn anything special about the source when you were doing research? One thing becomes really obvious for this example. The information about the Macy's parade is coming from the Macy's company site. So their expertise, they're the actual parade sponsors, and this is their parade information site.
So let's point that out. Here's what we might say to the audience. Macy's has a history section on its 2015 parade information website that included ...
Of course, there's not just one way to say this. So let's try something else. Macy's, the sponsors of the parade, made it clear in their history section of their 2015 parade information website that, well, you get the idea.
Here's another source that might provide facts for that Macy's parade speech. For this, we need to look around the website to discover that this is an information site for the marching community published by Ken Martinson. That means that the expertise of this site is connected to marching bands, so we might say something like this. Marching is an online information site for marching band news. According to Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, a 2016 event posting on that site, marching bands are selected around 18 months before the parade.
Still not sure what to do? Still wondering how to best decide what to say? Start with, why did I choose this source? And what makes this source special? In a basic sense, a lot of people will say the title of the source, the author's name, the publication or website, and the date it was posted or printed.
But pretend you're sitting in the audience. Would you know who the author is? Would the title tell you why you should trust it? Probably not. So in the verbal citation, tell the audience why to trust your source.
Now let's practice. Let's stick with the Macy's parade speech. We'll probably want to provide the audience with examples of the performers who are a part of the parade. So here's an article that appeared in the online Washington Post. The article listed the performers scheduled to be on NBC coverage of this parade.
Okay, so we know that Yar is a journalist. We know Washington Post is an online newspaper, follows certain journalistic standards for fact-checking, and this was a timely piece, published the day of the 2016 parade.
So let's try this. Washington Post online reporter Emily Yar's article Thanksgiving Day Parade 2016, What Time to Watch and Who Has the Best Lineup, listed the performers who would be seen in the NBC coverage of the 2016 parade.
That's good, but another way we could cite it is, in the 2016 Thanksgiving Day issue of the Washington Post Online, reporter Emily Yar listed the performers slated to appear on the NBC coverage of the parade.
That's good too. It makes the timeliness, publication, and professional standards really clear. So let's wrap this up with some final thoughts. You need to include your plan on your notes.
The second most difficult thing, according to those same speakers, making it feel conversational, and that takes practice.
So it's up to you to plan, practice, and put the information you need on your speaker's notes. Hope we cleared what a verbal citation is and why and how to do one. Student to student, that's how to do a verbal citation.
Okay, so there we go. So with the verbal citation for the civic engagement news practice speech, I am listening for according to will be what we'll use to practice. So according to. Once we get to our formative speech, persuasive speech, you can incorporate kind of different, different phrasing, but I'll be listening out for according to. So I've talked through ethical public speaking. Ethical public speaking is speaking where you are incorporating sources, but not passing those sources off as your own. That is the main ethical lapse that we see in speeches, particularly I see in speeches in this class, is just failure to cite those sources. So our goal is to, as we are practicing, to avoid these. Again, it's not intentional, it's usually accidental. And so we want to avoid those and make sure we cite our sources. So then that's, we transition to, and we'll dive deeper into gathering data, and supporting points, but just for our practice, let me kind of go through an example. So this is a script that you can use if you want. I'll post it on Brightspace like I did the last one. And so again, this is just a practice speech, but we do want to, I think for this one, well, actually, no, I think we'll probably still stand at our seat. We'll wait for the Chicago places to actually come up to the lectern, just for time purposes. But so you'll stand up where you're at, and then you will start going through your attention step. Right, so here I have one of my favorite quotes. We make a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give, by Winston Churchill. We have a rapport step. I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of community service or civic engagement. Credibility step. I've done the research and I have found this article. And today I would like to share with you an article about civic engagement. And I would probably identify the specific article, right? As part of that. So then we go into the body of our speech. And this is where between now and Monday, find a story about someone or some organization doing some good in the community so that you can pull a quote out from that. According to this person, this good work was done, or these people were benefited by this project, or this person donated this money. It's up to you to determine if it is civic engagement or falls under the category of civic responsibility or civic engagement. So you're kind of making that case to us as part of the body of your speech. But really, all we're doing to practice is inserting this quote according to, and then we can proceed after, so not very long, and then we go into our conclusion. So after you share your story, what you found about doing some good in the community, then you can say, in conclusion, today I shared with you an article about, and then conclude with that memorable closing. So that's just a template, a script you can use to practice. But what we're really wanting to practice are two things: going out and finding a credible source, and then citing that source inside our speech. So let me talk a little bit about where to go to find this type of story. that I am pretty particular about where I want you to go. So let me mirror my screen. Yep. So let's go to, so first, I teach journalism, so I'm very passionate about journalistic ethics. I keep a very close watch on journalists. And I even, right now I'm teaching a news writing class where I'm having my students critique journalists, and which is very fun. I mean, them critique and analyze the effectiveness of certain journalists. But where do I want you to go to find a civic engagement news story? Here are my recommendations. So there might be some kind of community newspaper, community online site. What we're really wanting to avoid are sources that maybe the people sponsoring that might be problematic. People sponsoring that might have some kind of ulterior motive or agenda. We want to really stick to what are known as kind of the recognized journalistic sources. So I have a few that I recommend. And these are going to be the national news sources, right? So when we talk about national networks, we have what I consider to be the main ones, right? So we have NBC, we have ABC, we have CBS. The National Broadcasting Corporation, American Broadcasting Corporation, and I can't remember CBS.
I think it's Columbia.
Columbia Broadcasting. Columbia, that's right. Columbia Pictures is in CBS or one. So those are kind of the main networks. We also have PBS. It's actually also a really good one, public broadcasting system. So that's also a good one. So any of these, NBC, it's either .com or .org. Any of these sites are good sites to pull information from. But I do want to emphasize, and I want to share with you kind of our local and national groups. So here we have NBC Chicago is our local affiliate, NBC5. And so if you want to go to NBC5 and keyword search, go down to the search bar here and just keyword search civic engagement, then that might pull up some news stories that will be probably a lot related to the election. But there might be some good information here about people doing some good work in the community that's not related to the elections. Here we go. Civic Lab aims to reinvent how activism and democracy works in Chicago. Like an interesting story. Looks like Obama's doing some stuff as well. So I recommend keyword searching. So that's NBC5 or NBCChicago.com. We have ABC7 as well as a local affiliate. So same thing, I would just go to the search bar and keyword search. We also have our national sites, so NBCnews.com. We also have abcnews.go.com. So those are going to be the national branches of ABC versus our local affiliate. So those are going to have less so things specific to Chicago, but might be things related to other communities. What I recommend, my favorite source, particularly for civic engagement news, because they really do specialize in this, are two sources. One is going to be most nightly broadcasts, news broadcasts on the television, try to end on a good note. NBC Nightly News usually says, and there's good news tonight, and then they go into some kind of positive story. So if you go to NBC Nightly News, for example, go to NBC Nightly News, and you watch whatever the broadcast is, and you just scroll to the last story, whatever that story is, chances are it's going to be something related to civic responsibility or civic engagement. Not always, but chances are good. And so, so I like particularly the news television broadcasts when they do that kind of feel-good story at the end. The other source that really does a good job is going to be WBEZ Chicago. So WBEZ is a part of what we call NPR, which NPR is National Public Radio. They're related to PBS. It's all part of a system that seeks donations and does not make news for profit. One of the things that you have to keep in mind is organizations like NBC Universal are in the media industry for profit. So while the news journalists should still adhere to good journalistic ethics, the organization as a whole is trying to make money. Whereas our local WBEZ, which is a radio station, 91.5. So if you have iHeartRadio or some kind of radio app on your phone where you can listen to the radio for free, then you can listen to, just look for 91.5 WBEZ. Every hour, at the start of the hour, they're going to do a run through of top news just for the first few minutes. And then they're going to go into more in-depth stories. If you hear something on there, and you're like, okay, I want to find that, you can go to the website and keyword search what you heard and pull up that specific news story. So that's one thing. One way I recommend finding it is if you don't have time to necessarily sit down and do some research on your commute or whatever, tune into WBEZ for a little bit and see if you can catch a civic engagement related news story. You can also go to WBEZ.org and keyword search something like civic responsibility and see what pops up. So the reason I like particularly NPR is they do what we call human interest stories or biopics, what we call kind of in the journalism world, which means they go into an organization or a person and they do an in-depth interview with them. You're not necessarily going to get that with the talking heads of the 24-hour news cycle. And the talking heads of the 24-hour news cycle are going to be the MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. I would stray away from those. Not because they don't have quality journalists. I actually went to school with someone who is, her name's Caitlin, and she's an anchor on CNN. And, you know, so they are good journalists, but we're looking for local news, local people doing some good in our community. So those organizations aren't necessarily going to have anything that's local to us in our community. They also, again, as I said, talking heads of 24-hour news, they produce and try to, in some cases, keep the news cycle going, which some of us who are journalists have some ethical issues with that, with the fabrication of news for the sake of news, or keeping the news cycle going. So, but anyway, that's a whole nother lecture. So, anyway, the other keyword to kind of look for on websites like this are going to be anything related to culture. So you see up here at the top, culture. We can go into performing arts. We can go into books. We can go into pop culture, and then we can continue to search for information about people, information about organizations. So again, up to you to determine what is civic engagement as you are trying to essentially make that case in your speech, your practice speech. So those are my recommendations as far as places to go. NPR, I don't know if I clearly stated, it's nonprofit. So it's a nonprofit news organization. There are sponsors, but they are primarily supported by people like you and me. So they are not producing news for profit. They are producing news for community benefit. And that's why those of us who teach journalism really do try to make sure people are aware of PBS, NPR, WBEZ, because we need to keep nonprofit journalism in our society. Journalists who have no other mission except for identifying the truth and presenting factual information. So in our political society now, it's becoming even more difficult to really identify truth from fiction. So it's important we have news sites that we can trust. And NPR, WBEZ are repeatedly known to be the trusted organizations. Yes.
What about like the newspaper, the Chicago Sun-Times?
Exactly. Chicago Sun-Times is actually part of WBEZ.
Oh, okay.
So yes, so let's talk about that. So Chicago Sun-Times, the New York Times, the Tribune, yep. So Chicago Tribune, yes. those, and I would say probably Chicago Sun-Times, I've probably had more success with finding more civic engagement news. New York Times can be hit or miss, but I know you have access, I think, to the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. As a student, you get access to those things for free through the library. So, so yes, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, those news publications also are good resources. I would stray away from pop culture news. And yeah, stick to either a printed publication that may be an online version of a printed publication, like a newspaper. You could also look into what we'd call like news magazines, like Time or the New Yorker. Sometimes they have more of those human interest stories, dive deep into like just, you know, they've interviewed someone, really gone deep into their story. So, so I would say that would be a good source as well. So for Monday, what you are preparing is this. So go out, find a source, craft a very short speech. Essentially, this is an informative speech where the key thing that you're sharing with us is what's the main point of your article, which might or might not be civic engagement. It could be civic responsibility, could be, you know, maybe something more specific. So you don't have to go with what I've specifically written here, but do make sure you put that verbal citation according to, you know, and then as we learned in that video, right, we want to put the source name or publication name according to Kai Rizdal at npr.org, right, or according to this economist at Northwestern as posted in the Chicago Sun-Times. So we're wanting to make sure we're using those verbal citations. So primarily the publication, the title of the story, the author, and then their expertise or their credibility. So we want to practice including those in the body of our speech when we cite our source. Questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, shouts of joy, cries of outrage. So yes.
So we don't need to make a presentation, we just go give the speech.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all we're worried about.
So come prepared with speaking notes. I'll post this on Brightspace if it's helpful. I won't necessarily have this up in the classroom. So because you'll have kind of your own speaking notes. If you want to download the outline template, I would probably go with the informative speech outline template as we're transitioning more into informative speaking now. If you wanted to use that template, which has all of these pieces, feel free to, or write up your own. So again, we're just practicing. So whatever you speak from will be what you submit in Brightspace. And then that will allow us to kind of practice this. The reason we do this is because without fail, every class at some point, a source is forgotten and a source is not cited, but information is cited, data is cited without that source. And so we want to make sure that right here at the start, we are reminding ourselves that we must verbally cite those sources so that we are not plagiarizing. Right, I think, let's make sure. So next week, when we arrive here on Monday, that'll be where we start. So I'll give a few minutes. We have a few people who actually are out sick today. Hopefully they will be doing better on Monday. So we'll have a few minutes at the start to kind of get our thoughts settled, and then we'll do like we've done before, and I'll identify a pattern, and we'll just go stand up, share with us your civic engagement news story. I had so many just various things. I might have shared this before. I had a student share that they thought the Chicago Cubs were civically engaged because they were doing some work in the community. They were like planting some trees, right? I mean, yeah, that's civic engagement. So again, for you to make that case to us as to why it's civic engagement, but I look forward to learning what you learn as you dive into some of these news sources and find out all the good that these people or these organizations are doing. And if you do find an organization doing some good, keep in mind, you can, because this is just a practice speech, you can utilize that if you want to later on for that final speech, which is the civically responsible organization speech, which is where you do either an informative or a persuasive speech about an organization who is civically responsible. And so, so sometimes if people find a cool organization when they're doing this speech, I let them expand on that in more detail for their CRO speech. So keep in mind, if you want to do that, you can, not required. Yeah.
It's the last practice speech before we go into the informative.
Next to last. So we still have the Chicago Places practice speech
Okay, so it's this one, another one, and then.
and then inform. Yep. You got it. Yes.
I know I'm probably jumping the gun, but for the Chicago place speech, that's when you have to make a presentation, right?
Correct. Yeah. So what we'll learn between now and then is we'll learn about delivery techniques, but we'll also learn about visual aids. And I'll also dive a little bit deeper into organizational patterns, informative methods, and informative types. And we'll watch an example of a pretty cool informative speech as well. So all of that to come to prepare us for that informative speech. The Chicago Places is really our kind of first really dive into, because you're giving information. You're giving information about a place. So the purpose of that speech is to inform your audience about the place. So that's really kind of our first chance to really use the outline template to practice an informative speech. So that is next week. That's what we have next week. So if you have any questions as you're working on things between now and Monday, feel free to reach out. I'll probably be doing some grading this weekend. The big Alabama-Georgia game was this last Saturday. So I don't know if any of you are football fans and you got to watch that, but it was a very good game. And so anyway, I don't know if there's any big games this weekend, but I got to focus on grading. So if there's any grades I've not gotten yet, my goal is to get to them this Saturday. So we're also doing my spouse is doing a letter writing campaign, but we're sending letters to people in swing states. So so I don't know my obligations for that, but I know they keep me busy. My social calendar. Anyway, all right. So we're gonna get done a little early. I hope that's okay, about 10 minutes early. But thank you so much for being here. This has been a great week. We've accomplished a lot. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah, good evening.
Thank you. I'm not. No, this is my last day here this week. Yeah, but yeah, you send me. I cleared out all my texts. I know there were a few people that maybe tried to text me and I didn't get back to them in time, but I cleared all my texts. All my emails are caught up with. So if you need to email me or text me. If you want to hop on Zoom, I can also hop on Zoom and talk. And like that's where we can like share screen and look at things. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you. You're welcome.
Question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about the sources of the news, but I wanted to ask about some news outlets like New York Times, Bloomberg. Yeah. Which one do you trust? Not for the speech, but in general.
In general, I would trust both those. Yeah, Bloomberg's going to be some more financial. Yeah, Wall Street Journal, New York Times.
So all of them are ethically.
They are. So so all of those are, they hire ethically trained journalists. Whether the journalists are always ethical, that is sometimes the question, but usually they don't, their editors ensure that they are adhering to those ethical standards. They don't usually stay around very long if they violate those ethical standards. So, yeah, there's some organizations, some of the broadcast organizations don't always, I would say, in my opinion, keep their journalists accountable. But there are some times when we do. There was Brian, I can't remember Brian's last name. He used to be the lead anchor for NBC Nightly News. He made a mistake, said something that was false on air, and they ended up letting him go because it was the anchor of NBC Nightly News that a lot of people trusted. And so I think he since apologized, but that's, those types of organizations. And I would say New York Times is the same, right? They have a lot of you know, a lot of award-winning journalists. So, we're known to be, for being ethically centered. So,
Okay.
yeah.
It's good to know.
Yeah, there's gonna be some websites though that label themselves as news
Mhm.
that might not necessarily be, so it'll just be some scrutiny. And really it's looking at who is writing it and what are their credentials, right? So did they go to school for journalism? Do they have any journalistic awards? Have they worked for other news agencies? So those would be, and I'll talk more about that when we talk about credible sources, but those are gonna be ways to identify, is this actually a reputable news source?
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
So it is good just to really stick to the ones that you posted here, because if it's up to us to decide, like, I looked it up on this website, that could just be a created website. Okay.
Correct, yeah. And yeah, that's where I'll talk about, I have a .org website.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there's no vetting.
Right.
Like, and I used to post pretty regularly, I used to post blogs,
Yeah.
like articles. There was no vetting, it was whatever I wanted to say.
Mm.
So yeah, for now, I would stick to these, and
Okay.
then I'll do a lecture about gathering data and supporting points where
Mhm.
I'll share kind of the checklist we should look at if we're in order to kind of determine if a source is credible and reliable. Because there are going to be a lot of others other than what I talked about today that we can go to. But yeah, but for now, just stick to these.
Okay.
Yeah,
Would you like to?
I would like a
Yeah.
couple more. Yeah, I had one on the break, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, thank
Like
you.
my dinner.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for bringing it, Trill.
My favorite person, so I won't put them all by myself.
Right.
I'm gonna be-
All right, have a good one.